Healthcare, 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 healthcare. Nope. Monetary policy. That's what we're going to do from American Public Media. This is Marketplace. In Los Angeles, I'm Kai Ryssdal. 26th of July, I believe. Wednesday, good as always to have you along, everybody. I'll tell you what, if you thought keeping the healthcare debate straight, which bill is being voted on, by whom, and how many votes it needs, allow me to introduce you to the mind of Janet Yellen. The Federal Open Market Committee wrapped up its meeting today. No changes in interest rates, as we all knew was going to be the case. There were changes, though, to the Fed's narrative of the American economy, the statement it issues after every meeting. Here's what they said, just for instance, about inflation after their last meeting in June.
On a 12-month basis, inflation has declined recently and, like the measure excluding food and energy prices, is running somewhat below 2%.
All right, you got that? Maybe we ought to play it again. What do you think? Here you go.
On a 12-month basis, inflation has declined recently and, like the measure excluding food and energy prices, is running somewhat below 2%.
Okay, so here is what they said today.
On a 12-month basis, overall inflation and the measure excluding food and energy prices have declined and are running below 2%.
I know, it's hard, right? The key word, and literally I mean one word here, inflation is now just plain below 2% instead of somewhat below 2% a month ago. Yes, this is like Kremlinology, and mock me if you will for getting hung up on the details, but hey, it's only the global economy on the line, right? And at least you are not going to be surprised if they raise rates in September when next they meet. All right, so it's not like we can completely ignore health care, right? It is 17% of the American economy. The Senate is voting on it, as you know, and not to be forgotten, part of what the Senate wants to do with health care reform is use it to cut taxes on upper income earners. Which is interesting because in an interview with the Wall Street Journal, the president said he wants to cut middle-class taxes and that he might even be open to the rich paying more and that he wants to cut corporate taxes to boot. It's a little complicated, but it does make the question this. Can the GOP get there tax-wise from here? Here's Marketplace's Mitchell Hartman.
So far, there's not a lot of detail from the president on middle-class tax relief, but economist Douglas Holtz-Eakin at the American Action Forum says he expects simplified tax brackets and lower rates, plus
a big standard deduction so that you make a fair amount of money before you even begin paying taxes and thus take some of the lower middle class off the tax rolls entirely.
The president said yesterday that his wealthy friends don't mind paying more, but Steve Rosenthal at the Urban Brookings Tax Policy Center says so far White House proposals include repealing taxes paid by the wealthy.
The so-called death tax, the estate tax, the alternative minimum tax, the 3.8% investment tax.
Add on Trump's proposed corporate tax cut, and Alex Brill at the American Enterprise Institute says
the White House has not outlined a revenue-neutral tax plan. That's for certain.
By the Tax Policy Center's calculations, there'd be $3.8 trillion more in deficit red ink over 10 years, which could be hard for fiscally conservative Republicans to swallow. A possible upside to cutting taxes, consumers and companies have more to spend, so economic growth almost certainly goes up, says Holtz-Eakin, but not a lot.
I don't see any way we move from the 2 percentage point pace we have now to anything more than, say, 2.5%, 2.6%, if we got a fantastic disciplined pro-growth tax reform.
President Trump's budget proposal forecasts economic growth of at least 3%. I'm Mitchell Hartman for Marketplace.
We are still, I will remind you, trying to get Mick Mulvaney, the president's director of the Office of Management and Budget, to come on this program to talk about it. All right, moving on with the caveat that it is hard to feel sorry for a multi-billion-dollar international conglomerate. One cannot help but feel a tug on the heartstrings for the Ford Motor Company. Shares fell almost 2% today, despite reporting higher than expected second quarter profits this morning. It's been a 3-year slide for Ford, despite making the hottest selling truck in the world, the F-150 pickup, and changing CEOs as, and I'm making air quotes here so you can't quite see it, as the markets had demanded. So, if the company is doing so many things that seem to be so right, what gives with ticker symbol F? Marketplace's Adam Ellington has the story.
New vehicle sales at Ford are trending down, but they're still pretty good, and the company's second quarter profits were better than expected. Kelley Blue Book analyst Rebecca Lindland says investors, however, have been sour on Ford for a while now.
I don't think that Ford is really doing anything wrong. I think that Wall Street is just They're very gun-shy when it comes to traditional manufacturers.
Some of Ford's rivals are rushing to develop next-generation technology. Fiat Chrysler's partnered with Google's Waymo to develop autonomous driving solutions, and GM is invested in the ride-hailing company Lyft.
Whereas Ford, it's sort of just been grand pronouncements for, a while now.
Ryan Felton is a transportation and technology reporter at Jalopnik. He says Wall Street feels that Ford isn't keeping up.
That definitely, I think, played a role in why they pushed out the CEO, Mark Fields, back in May.
But driverless cars are still a ways off, says Edmunds analyst Jessica Caldwell.
You still have to sell cars in the here and the now, and that's what, companies like Ford are doing, so you can't discount everything.
Caldwell points to the continued success of the aluminum body F-150 pickup truck, something that will make Ford a profitable company for a very long time.
And not only is it the best-selling truck, but the transaction prices keep growing, and that means more money for Ford.
Meanwhile, the Detroit News is reporting that Ford is considering cutting several lines of slow-selling sedans for the U.S. market, including the Ford Taurus. I'm Adam Ellington for Marketplace.
No air quotes on this one. Record highs on the major indices today. We'll have the details when we do the numbers. We've told you a couple of times the past couple of weeks about China's huge new infrastructure project. $1 trillion, 60 countries on 3 continents, New Silk Road it's called. Chinese President Xi Jinping's roll of the economic dice. The BBC's China editor Kai Ryssdal has been following the 7,000-mile train route from China to the UK. Today we catch up with her at the European end of the New Silk Road in southeast Poland.
Stalowa Wola is an old steel town. 6 years ago, Yubo's company bought a struggling factory, which once built army tanks and now makes bulldozers and diggers. Yubo's job is to turn it around.
The future is quite bright. However, we really need the last kick to get the goal.
I'm witnessing what I can only describe as a kind of bulldozer assembly ballet. I'm in a building 3 football fields long, and running up and down the middle of this giant building is the actual assembly line.
It doesn't take long to discover that despite Yubo's efforts and his optimism, it takes this factory 4 days to make a digger that its sister factory back in China churns out in 7 minutes. Yubo desperately needs the New Silk Road to bring him buyers.
At this moment, the orders are not so big. Sometimes just 2-3 pieces, and we hope that thanks to improvement of this initiative, we can get more bigger orders.
But he may have to wait some time because Europe is not sure about the New Silk Road. European delegates did join the polite applause at the Beijing summit when President Xi set out his vision.
We will not resort to outdated geopolitical manoeuvring. Instead, we hope to achieve a new model of win-win cooperation.
But European governments fear that the money China promises will only be for Chinese construction projects and Chinese kit, and that fine talk about free trade is no more than talk, while Chinese markets are closed to many European goods and services. Wiesław Rutowski is a farmer with 99 cows to milk. He's hoping a China hungry for healthy dairy might help him expand.
China is a very big and interesting market for us, and we want to try it. It's like a promised land.
Many Chinese would think Wiesław's already in the promised land, showing me around his patchwork of green fields set amid lakes and forests. China's short of farmland and suffers frequent food scares, with a milk scandal fresh in public memory. In Poland's neighbours, Ukraine and Belarus, Chinese companies are buying land and setting up big dairy herds.
Very nice.
With the cows all milked and fed, we sit down with the family to coffee and homemade cheesecake. Wiesław's son Rafał tells me he's pushing their dairy cooperative to try selling cheese and yoghurt in China.
Say I'm a Chinese investor and I come and knock on your door and I say, I've got a lot of money, I want to buy your farm. What do you say?
No thanks. I wouldn't sell it to anybody. It is my father and grandfather's land, and I want to have my touch on this farm. I don't want to sell it and have only money.
But for China, Europe's now a place to buy and to build, and Beijing's learning fast how to divide and rule. Without a united front to fight their corner, European farmers will struggle to get their milk onto the Chinese breakfast table.
The BBC's China editor there, Kai Ryssdal in southeast Poland. NAFTA negotiations are set to start in Washington in about 3 weeks, 16th of August. It's a Monday. Today, though, we're going to get a little historical context for the Mexican-American economic relationship in the person of William O. Jenkins, an American who in the middle of the last century became the richest man in Mexico. Andrew Paxman teaches history and journalism at CDE down in Mexico City. His new book is called Jenkins of Mexico. We got a hold of him on Skype. Andrew, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Kai.
I'm going to go way out on a limb here and guess that most of the people listening to this interview have never heard of William O. Jenkins. Give us the thumbnail sketch, would you?
This is a story about a Tennessee farm boy who elopes with his Southern Belle girlfriend, drops out of Vanderbilt and heads for Mexico in 1901, and 50 years later is the richest man in the country. And how he gets there is a story of investment in textiles, in property trading, in sugar, and in the film industry during the golden age of Mexican cinema. In the 1950s, Mexico had the world's third largest film industry, just after Hollywood and India. And yet the man who profited the most was an American, William Jenkins.
It is also a story, you say in this book, of him having the guts, really, to buy when not quite blood was literally running in the streets, but almost. I mean, he took advantage of the Mexican Revolution. He took advantage of his political connections, and he built his fortune almost by hook and by crook.
As you know, the famous Baron Rothschild saying the best time to buy is when the blood is running in the streets. That's really what Jenkins did during the Mexican Revolution. A lot of old money Mexicans, their estates were being sacked by Zapatista rebels. They were in dire straits, a lot of them. And Jenkins was cash rich at the time. He made a lot of predatory loans, and at the end of the revolution, he cashed in. So during the revolution, he managed to quintuple his fortune from $1 million to $5 million.
Is there an allegory to an American tycoon? I mean, the one that comes to mind is John Rockefeller, but does that apply?
Jenkins very much was influenced by the so-called robber barons. And he imbibed that culture of hard-driving business practices, monopolistic practice, all that kind of thing. But then the other fascinating parallel with the robber barons is that, like them, he decides to bequeath his entire fortune to charity. You might say that he out-Carnegie's Andrew Carnegie.
I want to skip to the end of the book a little bit and draw some analogies and parallels to today. The epilogue in this book basically draws a line between William Jenkins and Carlos Slim, who I would bet most of the listeners of this program have heard of. At one time, the richest man in the world, certainly now the richest man in Mexico. Yes. Give me the parallels, would you?
There's a business genealogy. First of all, William Jenkins' right-hand man was a banker called Manuel Espinosa Iglesias. And Manuel Espinosa, in turn, became the richest man in Mexico in the 1970s. He became something of a mentor to Slim. And then, of course, Slim in the 90s becomes the richest man in Mexico. There's also the idea of businessmen who have got ahead in great part through political relationships. I hesitate to use the word crony capitalist because it's a nebulous term that covers a lot of sins. I try to make the case that they are both entrepreneurs and also men who have taken advantage of close relationships with state governors and even presidents of the country.
What do you suppose Jenkins would make today? And granted, he died in 1963, so he's been gone a while. But what would he make of the Mexican-American economic relationship of today?
Well, Jenkins was very keen on bringing the United States and Mexico closer together. And I think he would be troubled by some of the sounds coming out of Washington at the moment. I should say that he was not in the export business. All of the money he made in Mexico was reinvested in Mexico. But he was very keen to disabuse Mexicans of their prejudices of the United States and vice versa.
Andrew Paxman teaches history and journalism at CDE down in Mexico City. His book about William O. Jenkins is called simply Jenkins of Mexico. Andrew, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Kai.
Coming up.
Being a farmer is the best thing to me, and I like working,
Chefs and refugee farmers straight ahead. But first, let's do the numbers. Dow Industrial is up 97 points today, 0.4%, 21,711. The Nasdaq up 10 points, about a 10%, 6422. The S&P 500 basically flat, 24.77. Talked about poor old Ford. Elsewhere in automotive, that's a joke, by the way, poor old Ford. Elsewhere in automotive, Fiat Chrysler revved up nearly 1%. General Motors accelerated about a 0.1%. The White House announced this afternoon that the Taiwanese manufacturing firm Foxconn, known mostly for its work building things for Apple, is going to build a $10 billion factory in Wisconsin. 10,000 jobs are going to come along with that, plus or minus. Bond prices rose. Yield on the 10-year T-note down to 2.29%. And you're listening to Marketplace. This is Marketplace. I'm Kai Ryssdal. We started the program today with the Federal Reserve. Should tell you there was more in their statement than just inflation. Dr. Yellen and the gang also said they expect the already strong labor market to, and this is a quote, strengthen somewhat further. Parse that as you will. Enter now on that score Amazon. It said it's going to hire 50,000 people to pack and ship orders at its fulfillment centers around the country. August 2nd is going to be Amazon Jobs Day. Baltimore, Kenosha, Chattanooga, and 9 other cities. Jobs in some cases offered on the spot. 50,000 jobs is about a quarter of all the jobs the entire economy has been adding in each of the past few months. It sounds good, but how big a deal really is it? Marketplace's Amy Scott has a little bit of labor market context.
50,000 is a lot of jobs, no question. Most full-time with benefits. But don't expect to see a huge bump in the August job numbers.
The margin of error in the jobs report is actually about 100,000. So, it alone wouldn't make a significant difference.
Erica Groshin is former head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which produces that report. She's now at Cornell. Though Amazon plans to hire thousands next Wednesday, Groshin says it'll probably take a few months to reach 50,000.
To find them and bring them on, it takes a while to actually get people in place after you hire them.
Economist Mickey Levy at Berenberg Capital Markets says Amazon's hiring spree is a net gain for the economy.
But we have to put this into the context that it will probably involve or lead to a reduction in jobs elsewhere.
That's because Amazon's growth comes at the expense of brick-and-mortar retailers. As for finding enough workers in this relatively tight job market, Eileen Applebaum with the Center for Economic and Policy Research says it's not tight for everyone.
I do think that there are workers with the skills and qualifications to fill those jobs who've been overlooked in the expansion.
While overall unemployment was 4.4% last month, it was 4.8% for Hispanics and over 7% for African Americans. And the percentage of underemployed and discouraged workers is still stubbornly high. I'm Amy Scott for Marketplace.
The American textile industry is showing signs of life after decades of losing ground to overseas manufacturers and cheaper labor. It's a comeback fueled in part by R&D, research and development, into advanced fabrics, things like smart garments with high-tech sensors all over them, which has meant more textile industry jobs, yes, but jobs that are pretty different than those that came before. Marketplace's Aaron Schrank has that one.
Little by little, the textile industry has been on a comeback since the recession. It's more efficient and more innovative. Augie Tantillo is president of the National Council of Textile Organizations.
Our total production or output is up about 11%. In that time frame, our exports have reached record levels.
American-made materials are in hot demand in part due to these technologically advanced fabrics. That's led to jobs, but not for the unskilled mill workers of old. David Hinks is dean of the country's only remaining College of Textiles at North Carolina State University.
The graduates that we produce are designers, technologists,
engineers, chemists, and management experts, and they work in the textile industry to serve the entire supply chain.
He says graduates have about 90% job placement within a few months of graduation. That trend is expected to continue as U.S. textile makers turn away from competing on cost and explore this high-tech niche instead. UL Think runs Advanced Functional Fabrics of America, an innovation institute housed at MIT.
The basic capabilities in fibers and yarns is going to vastly increase in the years ahead. We need to figure out not how to monetize fabrics as goods, but as services.
Think's institute has already worked to develop programmable backpacks, which he says should soon be able to do things like send you an email when they get lost. MIT's incoming freshmen will get to be the first in the world to test out that new technology at the start of this school year. I'm Aaron Schrank for Marketplace.
We're going to do a supply and demand story now in the form of the food scene in Nashville, Tennessee. Nashville's a medium-ish sized city, growing, new people coming, more jobs, and more restaurants. Restaurants where the chefs are trying to be really creative. But creativity can be tricky if you can't find the right, sometimes exotic ingredients in a city where the market for them hasn't quite developed. But where there is demand, supply finds a way. From Nashville Public Radio, Chaz Sisk reports on a group that connects restaurants with farmers who've got firsthand experience growing crops normally found overseas.
In back of 210 Jack Restaurant, chef and owner Jess Benefield lowers a basket of small green peppers into a vat of hot oil.
So we drop them in the fryer for, it's about 90 seconds. You want them to blister but still have a lot of crisp to them.
These are shishitos, an East Asian pepper. They're usually a bit sweet, but about 1 in 10 is spicy. The perfect appetizer to go along with a hot bowl of ramen soup.
So we toss it in like a little Caesar-like dressing after they come out.
Diners never know for sure whether they're going to bite into a hot one or not.
And it's kind of a roulette, too, which is a lot of fun.
That's one reason this is a popular item at 210 Jack, a cozy, rustic-looking noodle house in a hidden corner of East Nashville. But keeping shishitos on the menu has been hard. So few restaurants ask for them that suppliers don't always have them on hand, or the peppers are low quality, or they may have been shipped thousands of miles.
So anything that we can get that's similar here and that people are familiar with growing, it makes a lot of sense.
Recently, that grower's been just a short trip to Nashville's outskirts, to a community garden set up on the remnant of a church baseball field.
My name is Chandra.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
This is where Chandra Powdell is tending his plot. He's taking part in a program that started just over 2 years ago. It encourages refugees living in Nashville to go back into farming. Powdell grew up in Bhutan but was forced out in the 1990s by an ethnic purge. For 2 decades after that, he lived in a refugee camp in Nepal. Then the camps were shut down, forcing him to resettle in Tennessee 4 years ago. He speaks through a translator.
Being a farmer is the best thing to me, and I like working,
Powdell strolls along his rows, pointing out the crops. Some are plants he grew in Bhutan, others are entirely new to him. He and other growers supply 210 Jack with a steady stream of organic Japanese essentials. The restaurant even provided seeds to get just the varieties it wanted.
Aloo, kamasuna, beans.
I have potatoes and kamasuna, beans, tomatoes, and shishito peppers, and I have a lot more stuff here.
The garden charges 210 Jack $6 a pound for shishitos. The restaurant has paid anywhere from $5 to $13 a pound from other suppliers. But Benefield says those grown by the local Refugee Food Project are better quality, with more spice and sweetness. Growers also raise food for their own use and to sell at a local farmer's market. There are refugee gardens in other cities, including a thriving community farm in Atlanta. Nashville's project is starting small, with only 8 growers. Each works a plot smaller than a tennis court. Lauren Bailey is with the Nashville Food Project. She manages the garden. Bailey says that even at this scale, participants get a chance to work, practice English, earn some money, and build confidence.
We're able to sort of highlight a skill they bring to the United States and give restaurants access to locally grown food like that.
And diners get more bite from their shishito peppers. In Nashville, I'm Chaz Sisk for Marketplace.
This final note on the way out, straight from the White House briefing room this afternoon, and Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
In this quarter, the president will be donating his salary to the Department of Education.
The president has promised, as you may or may not know, to donate his salary while he's in office, $100,000 this past quarter. On the theory, though, that context and facts matter, the president's budget plan for next year cuts the Department of Education's budget by $9.2 billion. Oh boy, we got to go. Brian Allison, Chris Clark, Brad Fisher, Jake Gorski, Bill Lance, Chris Morocco, Jeff Peters, Daniel Ramirez, Charlton Thorpe, and Ben Tolliday engineered the broadcast for us. I'm Kai Ryssdal. We will see you tomorrow, everybody. This is APM.